Hey everyone, Tactics here, and in this video I wanted to take a bit of time to talk about the Race to World First that's just wrapping up now in Sepulcher of the first ones. Personally, I've been a big fan of the race in general for a long time now. I've watched it ever since they started streaming back in Aldir, and this race I actually got to be involved in it casting for Method, which was really cool. Shout out to all my co-casters and everyone involved with that event because it was really fun for me. Great event, had a great time. First and foremost, though, I want to talk about the results, obviously, here. So, as of this recording, only 6 guilds have actually killed the jailer on Mythic. So far, there's a few getting close as well, though. But Echo did end up defending their title from Sanctum of Domination, remaining the top guild. And then in second place, we actually had the rebuilding rather, Method, which was a bit of a surprise for a lot of people there. They did a really good job this tier. And in third place, we have Skyline from China. Notably, Liquid down here in fifth. Liquid, again, is previously Limit. They were bought out. They've been Echo's main competition for the last few years now. It's mostly been a two-horse race between Echo and Liquid, but they did drop all the way to fifth here. I think a big reason for that is burnout due to the length of the race, but that's something I'm going to touch on later, so I'll leave that for now. Discussing the race itself, it was definitely a unique one and something that's going to be remembered for a long time. There are mountains of splits, tightly tuned bosses, and the return of things like throughput healers being very dominant. It was an interesting race to watch, and I want to talk a little bit about why this race might have ended up the way that it did, what potentially caused that, and some changes moving forward that may make the event better or may be permanent changes to the event. So for those that are unaware, the main talking point about this race was the length. The jailer died on day 18 of the race, again killed by Echo, the longest ever since the race began being streamed back in Aldir, and nearly matching the longest raid tier in modern WoW history, which occurred back in Tomb of Sargeras, which went 19 days before Kil'jaeden was killed by Method. The big question here, why was this tier so long? And I really do think it boils down to one major factor, and that's double legendary. The raid was tuned for double legendaries, but you were not able to actually obtain them until week 3. This had a couple main consequences. The first being guilds ended up spending much more time on earlier bosses compared to previous tiers. A great example is Lihavim. It was about a 50 pull boss, but if you look at the actual time spent and compare it to Sanctum of Domination, or you compare it to Castle Nathria, there's not really a comparable boss in terms of difficulty at that point in the raid. Obviously, something like Painsmith, which falls in a similar position, is a huge raid wall in Sanctum, right? But if you compare them to like Guardian, Fatescribe, and KT, all three of them together would be about the same amount of time as Lihavim. Similarly, in Castle Nathria, you could combine Enerva, Zymox, Sun King, and Council to get like the same progression time in the same ballpark. So that boss took a lot of time, a lot more than previous tiers. Alondris. A lot of raiders are calling this the hardest boss they ever progressed on. Definitely the hardest in all of Shadowlands, probably making a claim at the top 5 hardest bosses of all time. Alone, a boss like this would increase any raid's duration by a couple days, of course adding on that whole double legendary thing. Mechanically, the boss was exceptionally difficult, but double legendaries would have still helped knock the pull count and time spent on this boss down a pretty significant amount, right? You got things like Reclaim Shield that would get broken faster. The whole phase durations would be much shorter, which means there's less opportunity for you to fail a bomb, right? So less actual wipe checks. From Halandras onwards, it's very clear that all those remaining bosses, so Anduin, Lords of Dread, Rygallon, and the Jailer himself, were extremely tightly tuned around double legendary, with only Echo and Liquid actually being able to down both Rygallon and Lords of Dread before the third reset. Not even the second reset, before the third reset. Lords of Dread is one of those fights as well that required an extremely specific stack comp to kill the boss, which was kind of different than your normal comp they were using for the rest of the raid, so not a lot of groups were prepared with the number of Frost DKs and Survival Hunters to kill that boss. This exceptionally tight tuning also kind of led to a huge amount of splits this race world first, more than we've seen in any race in the past, and probably more than both Castle Nathria and Sanctum of Domination combined. Again, part of this due to that extremely tight tuning, requiring guilds to go back and get any possible upgrade to get a chance to kill these bosses that were tuned for double Lego, which they just didn't have, so they just needed to get as geared as possible. The other part was the return of tier, combined with 2 pieces of tier being locked behind the Mythic Raid Week release, since Lords of Dread and Rygalon were not available. It kind of meant guilds felt like they needed to go back and do these bosses first to kind of see who would get 4-piece, and that way they wouldn't be wasting mythic gear on people that couldn't get 4-piece during the first week, where they all assumed they would be doing the bulk of their progress. Right? Obviously, this ended up not mattering as much, right? We saw like the rogues in Liquid, for example, not having 4-piece in the first week, but luckily the race went long enough that it wasn't a major impact. They were able to get relatively geared and get their 4-piece the next week without the raid being almost done already, right? But it's still something that guilds didn't know they had so much time, right? So if the raid was going to be a relatively short raid, 100% that would have been the play, right? To split early, see who got 4-piece or had the ability to get 4-piece, and then that way you're not wasting any valuable mythic eye level loot, because you're not going to, usually anyways, not going to get a bunch of lockouts of it, right? Throughout the first 2 weeks of the race, we saw top guilds do hundreds of split runs, whether that be for specific tier pieces to complete 4 sets, whether that be for weapons, like the jailer weapon, trinkets, the Anduin class rings, whatever it was way more than it's been in the past. And it led to a massive escalation as well in the gold funding required by a top-end guild to actually remain competitive. Hundreds of millions of gold were spent by each guild to pay helpers to funnel gear to their raiders. Absolutely ludicrous numbers of gold. We actually saw a bidding war on social media between European guilds Pieces, Echo, and Method in the weeks leading up to the raise, and it really raises the question is, how is a guild with less resources at their disposal able to actually compete with some of the powerhouses that already exist and have massive troves of gold available to borrow from? And also, let's not forget, outside of this gold issue, there's only a finite number of people that can actually trade this gear in the first place. So how are these smaller guilds supposed to compete with these massively more popular guilds with bigger fan bases? They're just always going to have an edge with the current loot system. A great example is comparing Liquid, again formerly Limit, number 1 NA guild, to BDGG, the number 2. If you look at when they were both progressing on Halandris in week 1, we saw a multiple item level gap between them on average. And these are all guilds that have the resources to pay helpers, right? It's not like BDGG doesn't have money. They can pay helpers, but they just don't have the same kind of influence, the same kind of following as a guild like Liquid, and therefore they have less people willing to help them out. Similar thing happened to both Pieces and Method when you compare them to Echo. These are all guilds that have the resources. Like I mentioned, it's not like they can't pay. They have at least a somewhat recognizable name, right? They've all been big for several years. Imagine now if you're a newer guild wanting to compete, how are you going to find the traders to keep up? And I think this right here is actually the main argument for the return of Master Loot. Will it reduce the number of splits? No, it's not going to do that at all. If anything, guilds will do more splits. But what it does eliminate is the requirement to come in with hundreds of millions of gold and a fan base of helpers willing to come and trade you items. It's, if I'm being honest, it's kind of a weird aspect of the race, and it's been especially highlighted by Sepulcher, but I would not be unhappy to see it completely disappear, and I'm sure all of the players would agree with that. Staying on topic, though, I do think splits being run at the beginning of the race could kind of end up being the new meta, as it were, specifically if tier bosses remain in the game going forward. It just doesn't make sense to potentially have mythic eye level gear go on to characters who don't have the ability to obtain a 4-piece in the first week, especially if the race, being as long as it was this time, is an anomaly, which I do think it was. Again, kind of just going back to my original point of the tuning being around double legendary, which was a bit of a thing, hopefully a bit of a Sepulcher only problem. We move on from tuning and just kind of look at what kind of problems longer races cause. First and foremost is player health, fatigue, and availability. Now, there's a lot of absolutely terrible takes when it comes to this topic, so I'm just going to say it off the bat. Just because they're playing video games for 16 hours a day doesn't mean it isn't exhausting, stressful, and in some cases anxiety inducing, right? These guys are playing at the highest possible level. Laser focus at all times takes a lot of energy to have that much focus and maintain it for that long and play at that high of a skill level for that long. We actually saw Liquid, who was in second place at the time, decide to step back for about a day and a half to kind of let their players fly home, rest for a little bit, take a breather before continuing, and I 100% applaud that decision. I think it was the right one for them, and I think that's something that guilds need to think about a little bit more moving forward. If we look at the impact to the other top guilds outside, we saw BDGG stop actually day rating entirely because the race went so long. We saw players dropping in and out to participate in the AWC, and we saw individual players from, I believe, every single guild in the top end step down after the second week due to either work or school commitments, right? A lot of these players have lives outside the game. Contrary to popular belief, they can only put stuff off for so long, and them needing to step down because the race went so long is just really unfortunate. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed watching this insanely difficult raid as long as it went on, but I'd much rather see a shorter race with everyone playing at full strength than a longer one where health and roster issues start cropping up. It also has an impact on orgs planning these events, right? In-person events are super cool. There's a lot of benefits to them, but if you don't know if a race is going to be 6 days or 16 days, the logistics become a lot more difficult. I'm not sure on the accuracy, but I heard some actually ridiculous daily cost numbers coming from Liquid, because the race went longer than expected, which, I mean, it's expensive, right? Another discussion I've seen is that a long race requires a much different sort of strategy on how you handle player burnout, as opposed to kind of sprinting and preparing for that finish to be within the first 10 or so days. Like we've seen in the past, it required guilds to kind of adapt and provide more players with more kind of sleep time off, to just let them be able to perform at that high level for longer. We saw Echo have a bit of a light day once they had just reached the jailer the day before their reset happened, and it appeared to work really, really well for them, right? They did really well on the jailer. Likewise, Liquid Max has come out and said that they would have adjusted their time spent rating and potentially even give everyone an entire day off had they known how long the tier would end up being. And I think a guild like Method, for example, was a guild that actually adapted pretty well to this extremely long race, and we saw them have a lot of success this year, as I mentioned, getting second in the world here. If we look at what they did, first off, it was a remote event, which, again, in a short event, I think being all in one place is a huge benefit, but when it gets this long, the remote event was definitely better, but obviously no one could have predicted it would have been this long at the beginning. But there's that. So players got to sleep in their own bed every night, right? That's a huge deal, right? The comfort of your own home for 3 weeks when you're raiding, that's big. On top of that, they were consistently cutting 1 to 2 hours per day off of their raid time, going to bed a little bit earlier and starting their raid a little bit later. 1 to 2 hours a day may not seem like much, but over the course of 20 plus days, right, that really adds up. On top of this, I think Method actually made a fantastic strategic decision to catch up when they were still progressing on Anduin, right? They opted to commit those Vantis runes to Anduin because they had seen how Lords of Dread and how Ragallon were shaping up and how they were basically tuned around double Lego, and they kind of made that decision to Vantis on Anduin, kill that boss a little bit faster, and then take the rest of the week a little bit lighter, right? A little bit lower pressure on them, just kind of learn the bosses with no expectation of killing either Lords of Dread or Ragallon, do some splits, and kind of go hard as soon as the weekly reset came. And this decision kind of let them blast forward, killing Lords of Dread and Ragallon exceptionally quickly, and allowing them to eventually catch up and get world second on the jailer, which was absolutely huge for them, right? Fantastic storyline for Method this expansion. Rebuilding, going from 10th to 5th to 2nd has got to be a huge morale boost for those players. They 100% deserve it. I'm super excited to see what ends up happening for Method in 10.0. Another interesting storyline, actually, the rise of Eastern guilds, right? We saw 5 Chinese-based guilds in the top 10 here, I think. Yeah, we have Skyline, obviously 3rd, Aster 6th, JTH, Xiaoji, I don't know, Kiahoro, I don't know how to say that one, sorry. But yeah, 5 in the top 10 there, which is, I mean, this region has been getting stronger and stronger, and they still managed to put out fantastic results despite having a reset on Thursday compared to the Wednesday or Tuesday of EU and NA. Overall, though, moving back to kind of the race duration, the question kind of becomes like, is this actually an anomaly, or is this the way moving forward? And one thing I think a lot of these guilds and organizations would appreciate is just a general sense from Blizzard on the how long they expect a raid to go. My guess is that they never intended for it to last this long. My guess is, tuning around double legendary, obviously they think it's going to extend it a little bit, but I don't think anyone expected Halandris to be as difficult as it was, which added several days to the race. And I just don't think it was Blizzard's intention to have a race this long, and I do expect that races are going to kind of go back to their the old length as it were, somewhere in the 8 to 12 day range. Is my guess, at least for the future. I think this one was a bit of an anomaly again because of how that tuning went, that tuning decision. But I want to know what you guys think about that. Hopefully this has been coherent. I know I've been jumping around a lot here, so I just wanted to kind of talk about this, put it all out there. I have a bunch of thoughts of this, had a lot of fun on the event. I would love to know what you guys think. Like I said, though, did you guys enjoy the race? How do you feel about the raid itself? What do you think about the duration? Is it a Blizzard problem? Is it a guild problem? Let me know down in the comments below. Otherwise, that's it for this video. With the race done now, hopefully I'll have a lot more time for things like keys, so be sure to subscribe to the channel to be notified when I post those advanced route videos, and also be sure to check out me on Twitch at Tactics. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video.